Hey everyone, welcome to the stream. I am here with Unlearning Economics. If you were not aware, we recently collabed on a video called The Death of Econ 101, which is up on Unlearning Economics channel. So do go check that out if you are interested. But if you are, I don't know, didn't see the video and for some reason don't know who Unlearning Economics is, maybe I'll just ask you, UE, to introduce yourself before we get started on the stream.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Unlearning Economics and I'm an academic economist from the UK who fairly recently started a YouTube channel trying to bring economics to BreadTube basically and fill the gap in economics content on YouTube from a broadly leftist perspective. Yeah, that's about it, I think.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so everyone check out his channel. So yeah, we thought that we would have a chat about the video, I guess some of our thoughts around economics in general, and potentially we're open to questions from the chat. So if you have any questions, we are open to them. But I guess just to start off, yeah, we're just going to have kind of a chill chat about the video and Econ 1 in general. So yeah, to start off, maybe we can talk about what motivated us to make the video. So what was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, the video is called The Death of Economics 101, and it was motivated by me basically observing that, through studying economics, I realized that the popular notion of economics 101 and, the economy works a certain way, demand and supply, people respond to incentives, all those types of things that you hear about economics in popular discourse, they had kind of been displaced really, and proven wrong one way or another with evidence or with perhaps better theory by interrogation of the assumptions. And so what I wanted to do was kind of document this, at least to a certain extent. And I think the main area where this has been very clear and very, very prominent is like the minimum wage debate, right? Because that was just like, it was such a clear test of the standard demand and supply model of the labor market that just didn't seem to come out the way that the model would predict. And also on top of that, it's still a massively controversial debate in politics. So it just seemed like a very good topic to center a video around, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, very timely as well with all the debates going on. So yeah, that's largely for me as well. I think actually we were tagged together on Twitter by someone who was like, you should make a video about Econ 101. And I was like,
yeah, that's what I just gave you is the fake reason, right? The real reason is that somebody on Twitter said you should make a video on economics 101, and I was like, that sounds like a good enough idea. So yeah. We just did it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and for me, I mean, I was obviously interested in this. Oh yeah, someone just brought up Anwar Shaikh, shout out. But yeah, I was always interested in this because I guess my background in academia is more political economy. And so yeah, I always kind of started from, I guess, the position of critiquing capitalism, but then I obviously wanted to, get more curious about, well, what is the evidence for the other side, right? Like what is what are the empirical or what is the empirical basis for this kind of mainstream kind of neoclassical economic position? And then the more I dug into it, I realized there really was no empirical basis for it. And yeah, I guess I've just had a lot of interesting conversations throughout my life with, friends and family, where they will be repeating these kind of, very standard Econ 101 kind of things, or, if you want to call it economism or whatnot. And it's I don't know, just because these things have been repeated so often, I guess people kind of just take them as fact. And then even when you try to show the empirics of it, or kind of push back on that, then it just doesn't really go anywhere because people just assume that, well, no, this is fact, right? Like this is what we've all accepted. And so I think it's really great to have this out there to just to start to look at the empirics of it. So yeah.
I mean, I think there is this idea, and it's not just in academic economics or in, you know, among politicians or the media, it's really, really widespread of economics as quite a kind of rigid set of propositions. You know, that's how the economy works, and
Mhm.
it's kind of in some way like nature. It's like laws, and it can't be violated. And you do encounter that a lot when you're having conversations with people.
Mhm.
I mean, one which we so this was, I guess, it was quite micro focused, this video, wasn't it? Like focused on
Mhm.
specific markets. But the one you hear the most actually is probably the macro one about the budget, right? You know, you
Mhm.
can't borrow, the government can't borrow more than they the government can't borrow forever. They can't spend more than they take in taxes.
Mhm.
And that's just economics, you know, that's just straightforward. That's the iron law of budgets. And
Mhm.
that's something that you hear from everybody. And I think you hear it, you know, you hear it from people who are kind of genuinely concerned as well, that kind of myth
Yeah.
about equating government and household budgets.
Mhm.
And I think it's just extraordinarily pervasive. And you know,
Mhm.
maybe we can get into this, but you know, government's budget is very, very different to a household's budget for all sorts of reasons.
Mhm.
But I just think that how people view economics is far too rigid. When in fact, you know, economics is a social science, and there's so many different approaches you can take. That
Mhm.
I wouldn't like to think of any approach to economics as providing definitive answers on topics.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's really well said. That's definitely something that I hear a lot, the household kind of budget idea. Yeah, and it's yeah, it's just been really, really interesting to have those conversations, especially with friends and family. So yeah, I just think that more stuff like this on the internet is really important. Um, so yeah, that's basically why we did it. There was a question up here, just a very basic question of, do you have any reading recommendations for people who want to start reading about economics?
Yeah, this is one I get a lot. I'm actually in the process of compiling a kind of Google Docs reading list. And I'll be able to, you know, just send that to people when they ask this question. It's not finished yet, but I think to start with, actually, somebody's just recommended it in chat. I would start with Hajun Chang, to be honest. He wrote a book called Economics, the User's Guide, and it's quite pluralist. You know, he takes you through the different perspectives. He takes you through, you know, very standard stuff. I mean, stuff that you actually don't learn often on an economics degree, such as, you know, how are corporations structured. Just really basic facts about the world, which you'd think you would learn on an economics degree, but you don't. So he takes you through, and like, you know, the history of capitalism, and just various approaches to understanding how it works or doesn't. And yeah, I think it's really balanced, and it's, you know, it's not a textbook. It's halfway between a textbook and a popular book, so it sacrifices some kind of academic rigor to be readable, and you know, it's quite funny. But I think that's probably where I would say recommend that somebody start with economics.
Hmm. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if you can hear, there's someone in the hall making a lot of noise, but I haven't read that. But yeah, thanks for that recommendation. And then I also want to put together a reading list for kind of political economy kind of stuff. Oh, good Lord, I'm just ruining the stream. So so yeah, yeah, I would love to kind of share that as
Yeah,
well.
well, maybe we should collaborate on that, because
Hmm.
yeah, it would be good to have some of your recommended readings in the list as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I guess as you said, it was kind of, I guess, micro focused on certain markets. Do we want to talk about anything that we left out, or um, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a bit that I actually very nearly made it in, where I talked about a whole bunch of examples of where demand and supply might not apply. But
Mhm.
there's a really simple one, because if people have watched the video, I hope I can explain this well enough for the stream. But basically, the supply curve is upward sloping in standard demand and supply analysis, which means that essentially the price has to be higher to elicit firms to provide a higher quantity. And if you derive demand and supply from first principles, as you do in Econ 101 or Econ 102, what you'll find is that there's this assumption that basically businesses have rising costs. So it means that, if you create one chair, it costs you £100, and then you create a second chair, it costs £120, and then by the 10th chair it's costing like £300 or whatever. Now this is quite a strange assumption. It turns out that most businesses typically have like constant or falling returns to scale. And actually, as they produce more of something, they get better at it, they get more efficient at it, and they probably don't get worse. At the very least, we can say they don't just get worse at it. They don't just magically become incompetent, past a certain level of production. And so basically, what that means is the supply curve wouldn't slope upwards. And there's economists, like post-Keynesian economists, talk about this quite a lot. And they talk about how when you go and interview firms and you say, "Are your costs rising?" They're like, "Well, no, of course they're not. That would be completely ridiculous if every time we produce something new, it costs more than the last time," right? And so that's like the basis for the standard model. It's a bit more. I mean, I think the video was quite empirical, wasn't it? And that's a bit more of a theoretical issue. So we chose to go with looking at empirical studies. Could create a video of equal length about the theoretical issues with Economics 101, and that's just one of them.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, there's even, I feel like, a lot theoretically we could talk about in terms of the way that they conceptualize social welfare in these models, which is very strange often. And then we definitely, there's obviously we didn't talk about healthcare. We didn't talk about environmental stuff. But yeah, I feel like if we had talked about everything that we could have taken apart in this video, it would have been 3 or 4 hours long. But yeah, I think it is a really good introduction, and I hope it kind of sparks people's interest in digging deeper and learning more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of topics. Healthcare was one that I nearly added. I mean, I just added that video of AOC talking about it.
Yeah.
And I thought she, as usual, got to the point quite well, which is that basically, healthcare, people are just going to pay as much as they possibly can for it. They're not going to, trade it off against other goods in the way that's typical. So in a standard demand and supply. But yeah, I mean, and the environment as well. Earlier drafts had bits with the environment in them, but we had to leave it out.
Too much.
Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah, and for the healthcare thing as well, I find that all just so hilarious. Just the idea that oh well, if we need to empower consumers, because if consumers are empowered, and by empower we mean make sure that they have extremely high copays, or what I mean, make sure that they have to pay the most out of their own pocket for healthcare as possible. That's called empowering them. Then that will lead to the best of all possible worlds, because market efficiency will kick in and produce the best value for people's money. But it's like, this is a market that people can't opt out of, right? And they don't have, it's, if I'm looking for some kind of healthcare and this is all that I can afford, then I'm going to take whatever I can afford, or I'm not going to take anything because I can't afford it. So yeah, I just don't understand how that even translates to real life in people's minds.
It's like a world where all choices are basically the same, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if I'm choosing between having a chocolate cake and a vanilla cake, that's the same as if I'm choosing, life-saving surgery versus a vanilla cake, and those types of choices, they're not really explored. And the idea of needs, I don't think, which is like what you were touching on, right? That's not really introduced in standard economics, and it's certainly, not a part of the public debate on standard economics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then I guess the environment is kind of my whole bit. Oh, thanks. People are noticing that I randomly cut my bangs the other day, so thanks everyone. But yeah, no, the environmental stuff is also interesting, and it's less present, I guess, in Econ 101, even really talking about it. But there is this kind of interesting proposal out there that we don't really need intervention because the, supply and demand will lead to the best of all possible worlds with the environment too, because if things get more scarce, then their price will rise, and then that will naturally protect them. But then, of course, there's so many, perverse reasons why that's not really the case. And I think a lot of the ideas around kind of perfect competition or whatnot, like if we completely free the market, the implications for the environment would be absolutely astounding. And I don't think that's something that's brought up at all.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that the environment is kind of the economy is embedded in the environment, I think, and the idea that all kind of environmental resources have to come from somewhere and go somewhere, or some kind of waste has to go somewhere. I think that would be a really good way of framing the economy, from the start. That's how we think about the economy. We think about it as embedded in the environment. I mean, somebody actually mentioned the core textbook earlier. I'm aware that we're not answering every question. They asked for my opinion on the core textbook, and I will say that I think it's an improvement. And one of the things they do is they do situate the economy within the environment this way from the very first chapter. And so there's a few things they do as well quite nicely. There's some things they don't do quite nicely. I mean, I did a video on race and the economics profession with Carolina Alves, and that actually mentioned a bit in the core textbook where they really gloss over colonialism and slavery in the history of capitalism, and I think that's one big flaw that I'd point out with the core textbook. So yeah, it's better, but it's not what we want, I don't think. Core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, chat, that we haven't been paying too much attention to. I guess, yeah, we can't answer every question, but I guess there's a few more here. How would you handle political debates in academic settings as a student? Just looking at how other students push back against right-wing ideas, it often seems unproductive and a little goofy. Any thoughts?
God, I mean, I'd be interested to know what you mean by the unproductive and the little goofy responses. I mean, I think, economics, for me, economics is quite a good thing to focus on. Actually, I mean, I don't know what exactly you're talking about, but I do find the culture wars quite unproductive and goofy when you're talking about kind of speaking to people about them in everyday normal life. And I do think that focusing on economics can be a better way to talk about policy. But to be honest, I'm not sure I've got a great answer to that question. I don't know if you do, Maxie.
Yeah, I guess not really. Political debates in academic settings, I mean, yeah, they're always difficult. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely engage as much as possible. And again, I always just kind of try to take it back to the empirics, because those are kind of more difficult to argue with. But yeah, I guess that's all I would kind of say.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, using empirics is a really good way to argue, I think.
Yeah. It's like, well, what are we talking about here? Like, here's the proof.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Although sometimes that can backfire when people kind of think I don't know, people sometimes don't believe it if you just say, oh, there's a study that shows this. I think you have to explain it like simply, don't you? You can't just be like, oh, the evidence says this, and then expect them to believe you, right?
Yeah, that's true. Oh, they say what I meant was pushing back against orthodoxy on the fly is hard. You can come off as overzealous. Yeah, I guess if you're in like I mostly focus on political economy, so I haven't really been in settings where I'm being taught kind of orthodox economics, and then I have to push back on the fly. So I don't know about you.
I mean, I think that, pushing back against orthodoxy. One thing I find is that actually I wouldn't use too much kind of jargon in everyday conversation, right? And like Marxist jargon, I think can be quite I'm trying not to say alienating, but that's what it is, right? To people, people don't, people just don't, they don't know what it means. It comes off as a little bit, highbrow, kind of the stereotypical academic Marxist, who doesn't have their head in the real world. I think using plain language, like where you can, I think is a strategy that I find works.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's good to hear that there is a textbook that's kind of moving in that direction of starting from the starting point of our economy being so deeply embedded with the ecosystems around us. That sounds good. Hopefully we can move more in that direction. You did mention that Econ101 has shifted over time, and that maybe now they are teaching a bit more of this nuance. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, Econ 101, I mean, I did say this in the video, perhaps I could have emphasized it more, but there's 2 or 3 Econ 101s out there, right? There's Econ 101 as said by conservative politicians who just want to use it to promote their like right-wing policies. But there's Econ 101 as in the actual content of economics courses, right? And I do think there has always been a bit of a disparity between them, because if you, even in the first course, and even if you take a textbook like Greg Mankiw's, which is very, very mainstream, and he's a fairly conservative dude, even if you take something like that, you will be introduced to ideas of monopoly, for example. You will be introduced to the environment, perhaps not the way we'd like to see, but it will be in there. And so I think that there's always been this disparity. But having said that, it's moving even more away from things like standard demand and supply. I mean, core textbook is one of the examples where it's really, really widely used now. And also Mankiw himself has been displaced by Raj Shetty and someone else, and they've said they're completely revamping his very famous Harvard economics first year course. And they're just making it not focused around the theories that we critiqued in the video, and much more focused around data. So I think, yeah, there's been some movements in that direction.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Yeah, because I guess yeah, I know a lot of people who I think they just took Econ 101, and then they kind of came out of that as basically an ANCAP, right? And then we'll just really, really go hard arguing that what we have right now is not capitalism, and if we just really freed the market, and if we just really got into that sweet spot of perfect competition and perfect equilibrium, then everything would be so grand. And because it's so philosophical, there's no arguing it,
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there is.
I mean, yeah, this is like the very end of the video, right? I kind of spoke to this, but it just entrances some people, this vision of the economy, doesn't it? Here's two intersecting lines, in a cross, and that's how things work, and any intervention kind of, disrupts that beautiful equilibrium. And it's just, for some people, it was never that enrapturing for me, but for some people it seems just really to stick in their minds, and it's very difficult to dislodge, I think, once they've committed to it. I mean, that's actually the name of my channel, is kind of based on that point, right? Unlearning economics. It's because some people really can't think outside a certain way of modeling the economy, and demand and supply is at the core of that.
Yeah, it's highly optimistic as well. I think I don't know, some people, I guess the people that I know, it's that they really do want to believe that the world is getting so much better, and if we just did this, then it would be so wonderful. And I'm not really sure. Also, maybe they're doing well in the system, and so they don't want anything to kind of shake that up as well. But
yeah, I think there are biases in economics, and that is probably true outside economics as well, right? But in the type of person who is an academic, or who is making economic policy decisions, or who is in the media, there's a whole range of things, and race is one of them. We mentioned race earlier, right? That you wouldn't necessarily consider or be familiar with, and that's definitely going to affect your worldview.
Yeah, absolutely. So just trying to monitor the chat a little bit. So I guess maybe we can move on to our approaches to economics. I guess, how would you describe your approach?
Yeah, I mean, I'd consider myself a pluralist. So I don't think that there is necessarily ever going to be one approach to economics. I think I'd use different approaches for different questions. Most broadly, I'd characterize myself as a post-Keynesian economist, which I mentioned earlier. But I do think that other schools, including mainstream economics in places, have things to offer for certain questions. And I just think reality is too complex for us to completely, commit to one worldview or one set of theories. So yeah, I mean, I think one other thing to say is that I would like to see economics in general be less theoretical, and more focused on just, examining the economy, right? I spoke about Ha-Jung Chang and how he tells you the structures of different types of corporations. Just that type of thing should be at the heart of economics. Understanding what's going on in the economy in my country. That's just the type of thing that you don't necessarily explore. So I think, evidence and factual and historical knowledge first, and then, various approaches and theories about economics second, would be my approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I need to learn more about post-Keynesianism. I don't think I fully know what that is. But yeah, I guess my approach, like I said before, I'm always more of a political economist than an economist, and my interest in the economy has always been, insofar that the economy and how we set it up is political and has political effects for people and the planet. And so I've always approached things, I guess, more kind of like a Marxist, or kind of, critiquing the system in general. But within economics, I agree that I very much, I guess the term is pluralism, or maybe heterodox or whatnot. I really respect people like Anwar Shaikh. I think he's just absolutely brilliant. And what I appreciate about him is that he's always basing what he's talking about on the empirics. And I haven't read his book yet, but I watch him a lot, and I think that yeah, that approach that is deeply based on the empirical, and that does draw from various different positions, because as you said, when something's right, it's right, right? So no matter what tradition it's in, there can be important things to draw from across the board. So yeah, I guess that would be my
I agree with you about Sheikh. I mean, he's a good example of. I mean, I say I haven't read the book. It's like it's 1,000 pages, and it's his magnum opus. I really want to read it because I'm sure it's brilliant. I mean, I've listened to a lot of talks by him. I've read articles by him and papers by him, and I know some of the broad outlines of his theory, I think. But what I do know is that, pluralism, I think, can be, in teaching with pluralism, you're going to present people with a lot of different ideas and they make up their own mind. I think that's how every other social science works, right? Mm-hmm. But with Sheikh, he's an example of somebody who has incorporated a load of schools of thought, into his view, right? And there's bits of it, of what he does, that could be considered loosely neoclassical. Some bits are more Keynesian, some bits are more Marxist. And so that's a good example of, how you can draw from a load of different traditions and come together with what seems like a very cohesive and wide-ranging worldview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I also have. I'm just waiting to read this magnum opus as well. I need time to sit with it, and it's very, very detailed and complex. But yeah, I would say I definitely respect him. So we're getting some questions. What would have been a better approach during stagflation period in the 70s instead of austerity?
So I think one of the there are a few different issues. Nicholas Caldor actually wrote a really good paper on this back, closer to the time. But there were things like the commodity buffer stocks. They kind of could have been used to manage the commodity price fluctuations. And this is a post-Keynesian view, by the way, for SPY-DD. So yeah, so international management of commodity prices, which tend to fluctuate quite a lot and contributed quite seriously to inflation. I mean, there was an oil shock in particular, and I think ultimately it's difficult for me to come up with an economic solution to that, because that was a political thing. But there was also just really poorly managed labor relations, and one of the things about inflation at the level that you saw it in the 1970s is that it does tend to be a result of a wage price spiral. And it's kind of interesting because here it's the mainstream analysis and the post Keynesian analysis basically agree on describing the problem. But for the mainstreamers, the solution at the time, at least, was to increase unemployment. Whereas obviously, I would say that labor relations should have been managed much better. So yeah, I think better labor relations and international coordination to manage commodity prices. I'd take a look at Nicholas Caldor on that point. And let me just answer Spidey D questions as well. Spidey D's question while it's up. So post Keynesianism. So actually, there's a textbook by a guy called Mark Lavoie called Essential Foundations of Post Keynesian Economics or something like that. So it's a really comprehensive textbook. It's quite heavy being a textbook. There was also an article that was quite recent online. I think I shared it. It was called something like 5 Principles of Post Keynesian Economics. If you scroll through my Twitter, you should be able to find that. And that's actually a much more accessible introduction to post Keynesianism. And finally, Mark Lavoie himself actually has a shorter version of his textbook, which might help. It's like a 200-page pamphlet, which is just a much briefer summary of the key ideas in the textbook. So that's where I'd start.
Great, thank you for that. I don't know what the great filter is. Babylon says, do people feel that economics are a help or a hindrance in dealing with the great filter?
I don't know what the great filter is either. Sorry, the great filter, I'm not sure.
Okay. Just trying to filter out the comments here. Hey, Bad Mouse. UE, do you feel your approach downplays the importance of class struggle?
It's yes and no. Yes, because I don't mention it that much. But no, because it is actually at the core of my approach, and it is actually a part of post-Keynesian economics as well, class struggle. Fundamentally, I think the relationship between the boss and the worker, the capitalist and the laborer, whatever you want to call it, is one of power, right? And it's one where I think the worker has less bargaining power, and therefore is going to tend to be on the losing end of whatever agreement they come to, because for a few reasons, the laborers, workers tend to be more numerous than capitalists, and also because workers need to work to subsist, and whereas capitalists obviously have access to capital, so they can kind of subsist on their own, at least for a time. So it is absolutely central, and that's, if we're talking about the demand and supply model of the labor market, what I would replace it with is just an understanding that it's about bargaining power, and it's about class. So it is really secretly at the heart of what I'm saying. I just don't necessarily mention it that much.
Yeah, great. Again, I don't know much about post-Keynesianism, so I'll definitely check that out so that I can be more informed.
I mean, it's a broadly Marxist view, right? The post-Keynesian one. I guess it kind of coheres with your understanding of the labor-capital relation, or does it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it sounds like it. Again, I would have to learn more about it, but yeah. I guess, why is it post Keynes? Maybe explain.
Yeah, I said don't alienate people with jargon earlier, and now I'm doing it because, oh god, this gets very complicated, but it follows Keynes, right? So hence post Keynes.
So
that's the simple answer. But there's also loads of different other types of Keynesian. There's like new Keynesian and neo Keynesian, which are more mainstream takes on Keynes. So it has to be separate, differentiated from those. Yeah, just post Keynesian just means that, you know, taking the economics of Keynes and adding to it, really.
What are your thoughts on Yanis Varoufakis, the post Keynesian, and his takes on corpo syndicalism? I'm into Yanis. Well, I read his book, And the Weak Suffer What They Must, which I thought was fairly good. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I really like Yanis. I haven't read And the Weak Suffer What They Must. I've read Conversations with My Daughter About the Economy, which I'd really recommend. Again, that's a good introductory book for economics. But I've also read, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, because I don't know the term corpo syndicalism, but his new book on Another Now, which is basically a fictional book exploring the possibility of his version of socialism, and how that would work. So it's basically a complete fantasy where they've somehow overthrown capitalism, and they've replaced the financial system with something else, and companies work a different way. So if that's what you're talking about, I found that quite compelling. I mean, I found it quite pragmatic. It was, very much a case of taking what already exists and just making it more democratic. I think, making corporations democratic, having their workers run them, providing people with a basic standard of living through the central bank, and just all of those types of measures, I thought sounded very sensible. So if that's what you mean by corpo syndicalism, or Yanis Varoufakis's corpo syndicalism, then I think it was pretty convincing.
Someone's pushing back on, or saying post Keynesians are wrong on wage price spiral. They use fixed exchange rate paradigm, so not applicable to most developed nations. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that are, I think I have heard this critique before about post Keynesians and developing nations. I don't think I have anything coherent to say about it off the cuff on that, but I think it's probably a valid critique. Post Keynesian economics, I think, is more applicable to richer countries.
Oh, that's interesting. So people are explaining that the great filter is what separates species who die out and others who go on to become interstellar. I don't know what that means. It's a theory about survival of civilizations like ours that may have gone extinct, and if we have passed what made them extinct, or yeah, I think I'm not sure I'm fully understanding the great filter still, but I will look into that and maybe think about discussing that in the future.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so the idea that civilizations, once they go through a certain stage of development, they just wipe themselves out. I think is that what they're talking about? So any advanced civilization that was on another planet, at some point it's just had some kind of war, or some climate change or something like that, and that has wiped it out. But I mean, I don't know. I can't remember what the question actually was about that.
Yeah, me neither. But yeah, I mean, I guess that broad idea, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily agree, right? Like, I would say to become that advanced, you probably would have to deal with all of the internal contradictions that are leading to things like war and all of that, and destroying yourself. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Rain says, as an academic, do you see much value in trying to produce work that influences policy, or engaging with politicians and policymakers directly? And if so, have you gone about that? Or how have you gone about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do see value in it. It's not what I actually do in my academic work. I think some of my stuff's, I mean, I'm a behavioral economist, so I kind of look at human behavior. It tends to be one step removed from policy. But I do think that you know, academics, and well, I'm talking about economists really. I think often their theories can be very complicated, and actually, when you go and speak to a policymaker, they're like, I can't understand this, heterogeneous agent DSGE model. Like, there's no way that I can put that into practice. You need something a little bit more simple. So I do think that that's something that could be emphasized a bit more. I will stress, however, that I also think that it should be a more democratic process than it is. I'm not really a technocrat, so I want, if academics are influencing policy, I do want there to be some kind of feedback loop with citizens. And the Bank of England's been quite good on this, because while they're a very technocratic institution, over the past few years, they have started to have people, just the general public, in the Bank of England, to talk to them about the policy decisions they're making and try and get their perspectives. So yeah, I think economists could do more to make their work legible, to be honest, to policymakers, but also to the general public, and that would improve how they engage with policy. I don't know what you think about that, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. In terms of, I guess, my work, yeah, I mean, we do try to influence policy in that, but I mean, I guess the kind of work that I'm doing isn't just economics. Really, again, it's more kind of like political economy and the environment work, or decolonizing conservation kind of work. So yeah, we do write policy briefs and try to influence policy, but it's usually on like fairly targeted actions, and then just in my activism on the ground, that's what we're doing. But I guess from an academic standpoint, yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said. There's so many questions. Someone says, UE, what are your views on building dual power in an economy where the incentives are largely there to support existing massive firms that have the benefit of economies of scale?
Yeah, so dual power, again, a term I'm not 100% sure I know what it means, but I think what you mean is basically building power centers and political power in places that are kind of outside corporations or outside the state. So I'll take it as meaning that. And I really think that's a positive way forward. I mean, I think the anarchists are very right about that type of thing. They're good at doing that. There's a town called Preston in the UK where they've done community wealth building, and they've basically it started, I think, in 2011, which was an era of austerity, and they've began to utilize local suppliers, encourage co-ops, use local land, take it away from people who weren't using it, landlords who weren't using it, and use it to encourage local development. And that has improved the area, but also created a very politically engaged town, who have seen positive changes and are potentially ready to campaign for bigger changes on a bigger scale, because I do think they're symbiotic, right? When you build political power at that level, it can translate into the national level, and I think you do need it at the national or even international level eventually. Something like changing the way corporations are structured legally, for example, that has to be done at the national level. But I think the only way you can get that type of political power is by building it up in the way places like Preston does. I mean, I know you do a lot of that type of thing, right, actually?
Yeah. That was kind of what my latest video is about, is kind of building dual power, although not necessarily. I kind of talked about it more broadly and kind of on a much smaller scale. But yeah, I definitely think that's incredibly important. So I actually hadn't heard of Preston. That's really cool. I'll look into that, because that sounds like a really, really interesting kind of case study. But that's really exciting. So thank you for the super chat, Socialism with Pharaoh Characteristics. Have you read Doug Henwood's Wall Street? And if not, is there any book you could recommend to get an understanding of the stock market?
Um, God, an understanding of the stock market. This is, I feel bad because you did a super chat, but this is where I reveal that finance is like my my weak spot as well. So I don't feel like I actually have any obviously good book recommendations for just understanding the stock market. I mean, what I know is from a behavioral economist perspective, right? So there's a book called Animal Spirits by George Akerlof and Robert Schiller, which explores the rationality or the irrationality of stock markets and of investors. So that's the main one I would recommend. But I'm sorry I can't have a more comprehensive answer than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I have any recommendations for how it works, specifically in detail, but I think I did a video on the book called Finance Crisis and Stagnation, which I thought was really interesting, by Foster and McChesney. And then I have the book Econ, like I have a lot about specifically, I guess, the crash of 2008, or there's Steve Keen's book about that too. I don't think it really talks about how Wall Street works in detail, but it kind of, I guess, criticizes, or does an analysis of like finance's role in the broader economy.
Yeah, I mean, finance. There's a book called The Finance Curse by Nicholas Shaxson, which is quite good on what you just were talking about, the role of finance in the broader economy. And I mean, there's quite a few books. There's Mania's Panics and Crashes. I might have got those three the wrong way around, but that's like a kind of classic book on bubbles and stock markets. So there's those, but they're not just a kind of detailed understanding of how the stock market works. They are more of a kind of critical analysis of the effect that it has on the economy. So I hope that's kind of what you were looking for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, GMG, for this lovely super chat. Someone's asking if you've read The People's Republic of Walmart. I have not, but I know that Tristan made a video about it on Tristan Doesn't Shut Up. So you can check that out. But no, I haven't read it.
I think this is the book I've been asked to read the most out of any book since I started YouTube. And I still haven't read it. I mean, my understanding is that it talks about how the planning problem, as was conceptualized in the 20th century as a result of the failures of the Soviet Union and China, that is less relevant now because of modern technologies and computers, especially, and places like Walmart, bigger economies than most countries, and yet they managed to keep tabs on everything from a kind of top-down level. So I do accept that basic point about planning works better than perhaps a free market economist might argue. And that is evidenced by corporations. I mean, I don't want to comment too much because I obviously haven't read the book. What I will say is that I don't know if that's good. So, I mean, as I'm an anarchist at heart, and whether Walmart may be efficient, right? And I'm not saying the book argues that it's good, by the way, but I think that efficiency of top-down planning can often come with a human cost, right? And this is why I tend to prefer people organizing their own, coming up with their own rules for how they're going to work, how they're going to allocate resources that are suited to their local conditions that they have some control over. Even if planning does achieve some goals, and it probably should, especially with something like climate change, it doesn't follow that that's what we want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm largely in agreement with that. But again, I haven't read the book, and I am interested to read it. And
I will do for sure.
Yeah. What do you make of China's economic performance, and do you think their approach to capitalism differs from the West?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a pragmatic approach, really, the approach of China. It's not free market capitalism, and it's not centrally planned communism. There's a bunch of things they did where they, for example, they depressed their currency for a long time, and they continue to do that. That basically acted as a form of protectionism, so it wasn't free market at all, and that helped them to develop their manufacturing sector. They also did things like, they worked with existing institutions, and I think I might be misremembering. I'm going based on Danny Roderick's analysis, who's an economist who looks at this a lot. I'd recommend him. But they had existing farmers, subsistence farmers, and they didn't just take away their property and force them into the market. What they did was they created the market on top of that, right? So they said any additional produce that you have beyond what you need, you can sell on a market. So it wasn't kind of like forcing people into the market type of thing. And they've got a lot of state-sponsored enterprises. It's just a very pragmatic approach, I think, and it was in some ways quite different to the West. But I mean, Ha-Joon Chang talks about how the West used a lot of protectionism as well in practice, and it might not have taken the same form as China. But the notion that any country has developed with just free market capitalism, I think is basically false. I think maybe some city states like Hong Kong or Singapore, but they're a bit different, really. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, on capitalism being necessary for industrialization, I think that's a broader debate than perhaps the question you asked. But I think it's a fairly standard Marxist view, that, right? I mean, it was Marx's view to say that capitalism is necessary for industrialization, but once it's served its purpose, we should move to socialism. And I do think I broadly agree with it.
Yeah. So I just on that, I guess I read, it was Joseph Stiglitz's book, Globalization and Its Discontents. I think the updated version talks a lot about China's development model and how he believes that it was different from the West, or different from, I guess, neoliberal approach. And yeah, that was fairly interesting. Oh yeah, so Badmouse had said, how long do you guys think the crypto NFT buzz is going to crash?
Oh my God! I mean, I've just stayed out of this. I don't. So it's. I mean, Bitcoin in particular. I don't really understand what's going on there. It's just it's so volatile as an asset. I don't, and I think a lot of it is driven by people who just really believe in Bitcoin, right? Plus some organized crime. And that's what's kind of keeping it going. But the volatility, I think, just makes it as the idea that it could be an actual currency with that level of volatility just strikes me as completely absurd. And I really don't know what's going to happen with it. And I mean, the environmental consequences of it are absolutely dreadful. And I really don't understand why people think it's a good thing. Having said that, I do appreciate that people have been saying it's going to crash for a long time, and they have been proved wrong, or at least it hasn't crashed permanently. I mean, it crashes, then it goes back up again. So yeah, all in all, just kind of puzzled and a bit disappointed in the whole cryptocurrency thing.
Yeah, I guess I definitely agree with that. I've also largely stayed out of it. And I know a lot of people contact me all the time and say, oh, there's this new cryptocurrency and it could be really, wonderful for the left and whatnot. And I don't know, I'm highly skeptical. But yeah, I guess we'll see how that goes. Okay, I think Christian, thank you for the super chat, says, I'm an adjunct getting frustrated teaching the neoliberal doctrine. Schools using Mankiw's text. Any suggestions for us educators?
Yeah, it can be frustrating. I think, I mean, you say you're an adjunct. Obviously, there's limits to how you can change the curriculum. It's not like you're just put in charge of it and you can do what you want, especially when the students are going to go on to other courses and they have to have the knowledge that you're going to give them from the standard textbooks to get into the next course. So I think, just plant the seed, right? You don't have to completely overhaul the curriculum just to question a few assumptions. I mean, my A-level teachers at high school in the UK, they were, teaching us standard economics. There was nothing really pluralist about it, but they were always kind of laughing at the assumptions and making fun of them a bit. And I think that just meant that I never took it too seriously. And so if you just adopt that kind of attitude where you're like, this is ridiculous for us to assume this, or you just mention, no, the minimum wage doesn't seem to increase in unemployment. If you just mention things like that, then just, don't let them ever take the theory too seriously. And you can still teach the same thing, but with a kind of a lightly dismissive attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But did you want to talk about theories of value?
Oh my God.
We have like 4
maybe
minutes.
4 minutes, maybe not. Maybe we should do that another time.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Can you use, I have what? No, never mind. Yeah, someone asked, what are my thoughts on your critiques of the housing market vid? I mean, I was definitely, welcoming that criticism. I thought it was really interesting. And I think some of the things that he suggested at the end for kind of ways forward were useful. So yeah, I appreciate that, that criticism.
Yeah, I mean, the criticism was targeted at Philosophy Tube, right? It was targeted at Abby. So I think I did say in the video that I liked your bit about deregulation and zoning reform and the green belt, right? That's what it was about. So yeah, I just thought, I mean, I could make a broader point here about the purpose of my criticism, which was, I think, I was trying to be quite constructive with it, as opposed to your usual response video, which tends to be a takedown, right? Yes. But if I mean, it was interesting because I got a lot of love from kind of centrist or even right-wing types in that video. And I mean, it's funny because obviously the aesthetic of the video was a critique of Philosophy Tube. And yet, if you actually watch it, then it basically just advocates like communitarian and socialist solutions to the housing crisis. So I think, people were kind of fooled by the aesthetic of the video. And I think it was basically just trying to bolster the points. And there were some points that Abby made in her original video that I didn't think made sense, and I made fun of them in the video, as you do. But ultimately, is the housing market working as we would like it to work? Absolutely not. And I wanted to propose things that would address some of the problems.
Mm-hmm. Jacob says, I know UE is more of an anarchist, but do you think there is value in democratic socialism or social democracy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have been, I mean, Mexi, you don't use Twitter that much these days, do you? So I don't know if you know do you know who James Medlock is?
No.
Okay, yeah. I think I have been Medlock pilled a bit. He's a very Twitter famous social democrat who just, his whole thing is about just increasing taxes to reduce inequality and reduce poverty, and just having like a well-established welfare state and transfers. And he just hammers home that point, and he's got a very big following. I think he has kind of convinced me. I mean, I think I kind of see myself as, anarchist at heart, but when I think about something like equalizing incomes through the state, through transfers, I do think that that's a very positive thing. And I do think it's something that perhaps only the state can really achieve. And so basically I am completely pro social democracy, but I just think that social democrats in general, and this is true of James Medlock and somebody like Matt Bruenig, for example, they focus on distribution quite a lot, and they have less of a focus on production. And that's not to say that they don't care about production. It's just that they don't talk about it as much. And things like giving people control over production, through worker democracy or participation or whatever, I think those are extremely important. And it's not enough just to have redistribution and public services. So yeah, absolutely, it's a piece of the puzzle. It's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not everything.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. And I guess I would echo that I'm not someone who draws this really hard distinction between, reform and revolution. I think that, there are a lot of things that we can do now, or there are a lot of things that do have value that are still kind of within this same kind of broader system. Like, yeah, social democratic distribution kind of ideas, those are obviously valuable and they are going to help the working class. So yeah, I think that, yeah, I don't know, people who just act like there's no value in doing anything other than,
and redistribution can be thought of as decommodification, right? If you think about giving people, state services outside of the market, then it can be thought of as taking them out of the market. So I think it is part of the socialist project as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm conscious of the time. It's been about an hour. So that's, I think, all I've had for today. Do you have any time for one more question, or are we
yeah, good? I'm not in a rush. So one or two more questions is okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back said, anybody know any econ master's program with a pluralistic approach? I'm still mulling over whether to get an econ degree. Is it a complete waste of time or not?
Yeah, I would go on the page for an organization called Rethinking Economics. If you look through their Twitter or even search this, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly where it was, but they actually had a list of pluralist economics master's degrees across the world as well. So obviously they are kind of limited. There's not always going to be one depending on what country you're in, what part of the world you're in, but that's the most comprehensive list I've seen. So try and go through Rethinking Economics would be my advice for that.
Someone asked our thoughts on co-ops and cooperative economy. I think we're largely in favor.
Yeah.
In favor.
Yeah, in favor. Yeah. I mean, I want to. So my next video is going to be about worker ownership, kind of just like the case for worker ownership. And I think essentially what they do is they reprioritize the goals. They change the goals of the organization, right? Whereas before it was focused on, say, shareholders or profits. It's still, that still enters into it, but it's also focused on the workers. And you can see that in how they react to recessions, for example. There's a very well-established finding in the co-op literature that when there's a recession, capitalist firms, normal capitalist firms, they'll get rid of workers, right? They'll cut costs. What worker co-ops do is they just keep everybody but reduce their wages temporarily. And that's how they weather out the recession. And there are numerous other benefits associated with them, but it's just about changing the priorities. And I was talking about production just now. I think that's an important type of issue. Giving people control over the work, changing the priorities of firms, that wouldn't be solved by just redistribution. You're not going to change the way the organization is run and structured just from public services and redistribution.
Yeah, and I think that it could have a lot of political implications, because right now, one of the reasons why certain people have such undue influence over our democratic system is because they're able to amass and accumulate such great wealth. But if things are democratically being produced by the workers, and that's something that isn't really happening to such a degree, then that would have incredible political implications as well for, how things run on a political level. So I think that's definitely yeah, I think it's definitely where we need to be heading, obviously.
It creates a democratic culture as well, doesn't it? You know, it
Yeah.
has that people start participating in their work, then, you know, maybe they start participating in other things. And I think there's a good paper called, I think, literally Worker Co-ops and Democratic Governance or
Mm,
something like that, which explores this.
yeah. So this will be the last question. I'm not sure if you really have thoughts on this because I'm not sure how you feel about animal industries. But speaking of production, what are your thoughts on animal industries, and assuming they are problematic, what is to be done to end it beyond ethical consumerism? That is a very big question.
Yeah, I mean, I know how Mexi feels about this. Am a vegan, so I feel pretty similarly, to be honest. I mean, I do, you know, basically the way we treat animals now is probably the biggest crime that we're currently committing. You know, the type that future generations will look back and be like, you know, why did you allow that to happen? The scale of suffering is just unimaginable. So, you know, so many animals are factory farmed or just killed one way or another. And I turned vegan about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's gotten a lot easier to be a vegan. But I do think you raised the problem of ethical consumerism, and I think one of the annoying things, well, annoying is it trivializes it a bit, but veganism, and you made a video about this, Mexi, right? It's been kind of co-opted. And there's issues like, um, okay, so maybe we're not eating animals, but they might be exploited somehow in the production process, or so that there was that thing about chimps being enslaved to fetch the coconuts for coconut milk.
Okay, I actually
I,
didn't know that.
I don't, yeah, I don't know how credible that is. It's just something I saw in an article.
Wow.
But that's just a good example of, like, I think fundamentally, the relationship that we have with nature needs to change more than just like individuals going vegan.
Mhm.
Because as long as there's that drive to exploit whatever resources are available, including animals and including people as well, it has to be said.
Yeah.
I don't think you're just going to make it go away. So yeah, I think we do need, everybody should go vegan, but we need structural reforms as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. That was largely the point of my "Why I'm No Longer Vegan" TM video, because it's also that, even if I am buying vegan products very often, maybe that company is owned by a broader vegan or non-vegan conglomerate or whatnot. And despite the rise in vegan consumption, like the consumption of vegan products over the last 5-10 years. We are still killing more animals yearly than we ever have before. And yes, our population has increased, but it's, proportionally gone up more than the population has increased. So yeah, we're not going to consume our way out of this problem, especially because I follow someone called Vegan Batgirl on IG. But she does a lot around, lobbying and things like that, because she makes the point that, even if we are consuming vegan, all of our taxes are still going to animal industries and things like that. And that, this, yeah, just, I guess, making the point that we're not going to consume our way out of this issue. We do need structural change. So, yeah, you can check out my podcast. It's called The Vegan Vanguard, and we do talk about that. But that's really cool. I actually didn't know that you were vegan. That's awesome. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of your thoughts today, and for
Yeah,
collaborating
thanks.
on the video.
Yeah,
So
it went really well. It's gone really
yeah,
well. So I'm glad we did this collaboration,
yeah,
and this stream as well.
yeah, yeah, me too. So thanks everyone in the chat for all of your questions. And I will repost this as a video. So people can catch this later. But yeah, again, I guess just thanks all, and we'll talk soon.
See you later.
Bye.